Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time we are going to be sharing some of our favorite poetry, plays, essays, and short story collections with you in celebration of National Poetry Month. As we share these titles, if there are some that you would like to get your hands on, you can do that in several ways. The first would be to contact your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and talk to the staff there, and they'll be more than happy to assist you. You can also request through our online catalog, and that address is on your screen now. That'll give you access to physical versions, hardcovers, paperbacks, audiobooks on CD, and large print. And some of the titles are available digitally via one of our provided apps. There are two different ones. There is Overdrive, and the app for Overdrive is called Libby, and that provides downloadable ebooks and audiobooks, as well as downloadable magazines. And then we also have Hoopla, which provides downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is that there is never a wait for any of the titles that you see on that platform, so you can start downloading immediately. I am Jennifer Graneski, and I am the community librarian at the Dundee branch. And our introductory question for this week is to share a poem that you had, and I guess I shouldn't say had, like memorizing poetry is like suffering, you had to do it, although, so a poem that you have memorized at some point in your lifetime. And so the poem that I remember learning, and it was for school, and I don't remember what grade it was, but I would guess, based on the story I'm going to share, that it was somewhere around the 7th to 9th grade time, because the poem is an amazing poem. It is In Flanders Fields, and it is by John McCrae, who was a soldier during World War I, and he wrote this following the death of a close friend who was killed during the war, and he actually gave the eulogy at his friend's funeral, and then McCrae himself passed away in 1918. During the war. So it is a beautiful poem. I'm not going to read it all here because I'll probably start crying. But when you are in 7th to 9th grade, your level of empathy is often not that great. And so this poem has a very strong rhythm to it. And all I remember is saying this poem in rhythm with my entire class and not thinking about the words at all. So it literally, like, I remember snapping to it, and now I look at this poem and I'm like, why were we snapping to this poem about young men who gave their life in World War I? So I'm not even going to do it in rhythm because it just bothers me a lot to think that we ever even did that. And I'm pretty sure that that was not encouraged by our teacher. So if for some reason my teacher is out there and manages to hear this, I do not blame you. I blame us as 12 to 14-year-olds for going, hey, this has a catchy rhythm. Let's all say it together. So, In Flanders Fields, it's a beautiful poem. I appreciate it now as an adult, but I do remember memorizing that one as a class. So that is my memorization story.
I have sang In Flanders Fields when I was in choir. I can remember doing probably more than one version of it set to music. And so the second you said that, like immediately the choral music was in my brain.
I didn't even know that was a song. I'll have to look that up too. I didn't know that they had ever set it to music.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I know there's more than one rendition because I'm pretty sure I've done more than one. But yeah, it's a
wow. I'll have to look.
Very beautiful with music as well.
Thanks, Jen. And since Jen just shared, let's have Jen share her poem that she has memorized or memorized in the past.
The one that immediately came to mind for me was The Raven, and I'm going to talk about Edgar Allan Poe again, but I remember trying very hard to memorize The Raven when I was in high school because I wanted to. I didn't have to. I'm just a nerd and I liked it and I wanted to know the whole thing by heart. I can't do it anymore, but there was a time when I could just, off the cuff, do The Raven for you. just because.
Because that impresses everyone. It would have impressed me when I was in high school. Because I also loved Poe. Nice. Quoth the Raven. Nevermore. That's right. And so you got to do it with expression as well. Thanks, Jen. Also with us this week is Isabella Arnold, who I don't know if I said that you were a reference librarian at Ellis, Jen, but hey, so everyone out there knows Jen's a reference librarian at Ellis. Also with us this week is Isabella Arnold, who is a processing clerk at our Jami Administrative Building. And what's a poem that you've memorized, Isabella?
Well, I went to Catholic school K through 12, so memorizing was like a big thing. So we would do, for extra credit, I learned Emily Dickinson poem. And so I can still even do it in my 10th grade class, doing Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for English class. And you get extra credit, and I was good at it. So yeah, and we memorized a lot of Shakespeare, and I used to be able to do all of the soliloquies, and yeah.
Nice.
So yeah,
nice.
have to say,
I remember Emily Dickinson a little bit. Mostly I remember the weird stuff. Like, why do I remember the weird stuff that they told us that I'm not even entirely sure is true anymore, that like she was a recluse and always wore white? Does anybody else remember hearing that about Emily Dickinson? I don't know if that's true. I should probably fact check some things. Thank you, Isabella. Also with us this week is Jody Russ, the community librarian at the Bedford branch. And what poem do you remember memorizing, Jody?
I honestly don't remember memorizing poems, but I will talk about Shel Silverstein yet again today, and I still remember Shel Silverstein's poems. I don't think I had to memorize those. I feel like in that 7th to 9th grade level that you talked about, Jim Morrison was big for me. So Jim Morrison from The Doors wrote a lot of poetry. That kind of explains my teenage years. That's all I can remember.
Great. Thanks, Jody. Now we have more insight. And also with us this week is Kristen Brown, who is a reference librarian at the Bedford branch. And what poem do you remember memorizing, Kristen?
So I don't really remember having to memorize any. In fact, there's not a lot of poetry in my memory being emphasized in school, but there is one that has kind of stuck with me. It's one that I enjoyed when I was in high school, but I don't know if I ever actually memorized it. But I was just talking to you guys before this about it, but it's by Robert Frost, and it's the one about the fork in the road. So you can choose the two paths, right? The one that's less traveled or the one that's well worn. And so I've always liked that poem, but honestly, the only one I probably ever memorized was like, the roses are red, violets are blue, make up your ending. I do have a love for poetry, but there's just none that I really remember having to memorize. Shel Silverstein's a good one, especially when you're young. I mean, I would read those books front to back. So I feel like if I read those books, it would take me back and I would remember them. But off the cuff, I don't really remember any that I had to memorize or did.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristen. And now we're going to start sharing some of our titles that fit into this poetry, essay, short story, plays. And let's have Isabella get us started.
So I was actually really excited for this theme because I love reading essays. I love short stories. I read a lot of them, which I found surprising then also that like people didn't have titles off their cuff, because I was like, what? Well, let me pull up my list. But the first book I'll talk about is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. I own this book. Like, it's a big deal. I actually own this book. And I even own it on Kindle as well, because this is like my emergency book. Like when like the storm is happening around me and I need a second, this is my go-to. It takes maybe 20 minutes. I've read it to my son multiple times. I keep it in his playroom so then he can pull it out and flip through it and melt my heart. I've read it to my students. Like, I took time out of class one day and I was like, sit down, we all need to listen to this story and look at the beautiful pictures. It was actually published recently. Let me see if I can see a copyright date. It's been on, well, I guess it was published a year and a half ago, because it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 70 weeks. crazy. We have it in the system in hardcover, I guess. This is how my mother passed it on to me and said, you need to read this. And I said, I don't have time for a real book. Like, I have a 1-year-old. She said, no, you can sit down and read this in like a hot second. It's beautiful. Oh my goodness. I guess it's a short story, but it's more of, I guess, a poem for life. Like, and I'll share some of the beautiful things to it. So, and I just was flipping through it real quick, and I was like, oh, I want that one, and I want that one, and I want that one. I need bookmarks, and I want that one, and I want that one. I'm gonna like slow it down. So, one of our greatest freedoms is how we react to things. Yes, that is. Oh my goodness. And it has a cute little boy, and it's a mole. And then, being kind to yourself is one of the greatest kindnesses, said the mole. Beautiful. Often the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Yes. Little boy and the mole. And then my last one. What is the bravest thing you've ever said? Asked the boy. Help, said the horse.
Aww.
Yes, I feel like this is one of those books I look forward to continuing to share with my son, and really talking about the themes, because it's a lot of themes of grace, forgiveness, recognizing you need help, reaching out, really noticing that there's fear all around us, but then when you just let go of that fear, you can truly live. And like I still cry every time I read it, because it's just so beautiful. And yeah, no, so I ordered it from the internet, and it was going to take 2 weeks, and I was like, I need it right now. I downloaded it to Kindle as fast as I could, and I've never, stress Kindled books before, because we didn't have it on Overdrive or Libby. But yeah, it's truly beautiful. I think it should be required reading for everyone. And I think this is going to be my new book gift, like whenever somebody needs a gift because they're doing anything in their life, and it's great for all ages. And it's just so beautiful. There's a whole section about cake and how it's the best thing ever. But I made one for you, but I accidentally ate it. But then I made another, and just it's beautiful. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I know that there was a hold list, a few holds on it, but it's well worth it. And then my other book, Jenny Lawson's Broken, just came out last Tuesday, and she's amazing. She's absolutely ridiculous. Jenny Lawson, this is her third book, Broken in the best possible way. They're all essays. Technically, it's considered a memoir, but I guess it's memoir essays. It's not chronological to her life or anything. And this one, she really deals a lot with her depression, her mental illness, and then her physical illnesses, and how her body's just constantly attacking itself, and just talking about all the ins and outs of her insurance issues. And she writes this letter to her insurance agency, and it's amazing and heartbreaking, and you don't understand how we're in this loop. And then different treatments that she's tried to help with her depression. And my favorite chapter was it was all notes from her editor when editing the book, and it's just hilarious. Like, I thought it was so funny of these editors when they are contacting her to be like, did you mean to say that? Is that am I reading this right? And then just their back and forth. She's hilarious. And so I've been stalking this book to come out into our Sierra card catalog system. And I was like, oh, when's it going to be in there? I need to put my name on it. And then I went to put my name on it, and I put my name in, and I immediately put my mother's in because I know she'll want to read it too. And she had already put a hold on it and didn't tell me. I was like, you didn't put my name after yours? Like, what's wrong with you? And I was having like the Mondayest Monday, and it just seemed like everything around me was falling apart. And I walked past the shelf we have of advanced reader copies, and it was just sitting there glowing. And I was like, that's for me. I need that right now. So that's how I got to read it so fast and so early, and it was everything I needed in this last 2 weeks. It was everything. She's hilarious. Like, that's all you can. She's hilarious. And you want to be her best friend. She commented on the Instagram how her book is currently 3rd on the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction. And I don't respond to people ever that I don't know, but I left her a comment. I'm just like, yes, you deserve this. You're amazing. You need everything. And I was just going to keep going. But then I thought, is this too weird? But also she would this. So yeah, I can't recommend her enough. I loved her first one, Let's Pretend This Never Happened, and Furiously Happy. I know both of those titles have been talked here a few times. So yeah, I can't recommend her enough. Jenny Lawson. So yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that this one is excellent as well. I've listened to her first 2, and I'm on the waiting list for this one, so it'll be a little while, but she's worth the wait. She's always, and she manages to combine laugh out loud until you're crying, hysterically funny, with crying because you feel her feelings, whether they're, where she's dealing with very human, very real struggles. She just combines those 2 things amazingly well.
Yeah, and I love her like tangents that she goes on, and you can feel her, like if she was just right next to you being like, well, of course the rats had cake. Well, of course. Like, of course they were lawn gerbils running around, and it just like turns into a whole side note. And then, oh yeah, we were talking about this. Okay, let's go that. And Victor is a saint. Victor's her husband. And he just puts up with all of her crazy taxidermy and ridiculous packages that she gets in the mail. And he's just like, okay, this is what we're doing today. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabella. And let's have Jody share her titles with us next.
Okay, well, I'm going to cover a broad array of things. Let me get I had a document that I just ended up losing. Holy moly, that had some notes, so I didn't forget the things I had to say. Got it. Okay, I'll start with Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein, because that's the first poetry I can remember I had to read those. Kristen maybe had mentioned reading those cover to cover, and a couple of his are fairly thick books. So at the time that I would have read these, which would have been 3rd and 4th grade, it was quite a big deal to read that much poetry all at one time. So I still know many of these. Much of Silverstein's work's been recorded by musical greats, including Johnny Cash's A Boy Named Sue, which is he won a Grammy for that, I believe. Boa Constrictor is a favorite that I remember, and I looked it up this morning just to see it. I remember him sitting in a group of kids and singing that song. Like, Shel Silverstein's one of those guys that looks a little creepy, but when you see him sitting in the group of kids and singing Boa Constrictor, it's really funny. It's very Sesame Street stylish. So for this discussion, I was thinking of I Cannot Go to School Today, said little Peggy Ann McKay. I have the measles and the mumps, a rash, a gash, and purple bumps. Which goes on and on for 2 full pages, or if not more, about all the things she's experiencing, why she cannot go to school. And then she says, "What's that? What's that you say? You say today is Saturday? Goodbye, I'm going out to play." So, yeah, and ShelSilverstein.com is his website, which he's passed away several years ago now, but it has some wonderful activity ideas for Poetry Month to get kids reading, writing, and thinking about poetry, and drawing poetry is one of the things that he has on there. It's an activity where they listen to some poems being read, and then they think about the images that puts in their head, and then they draw those pictures, which I thought was really interesting, and I wish I had stumbled across that earlier. I'll have to remember that for next year, because I feel like that could be a pretty interesting program that we could do, well, when we can do programs. Switching gears completely, let's go to Shakespeare. I picked The Merry Wives of Windsor by William Shakespeare, because it's one that doesn't instantly pop into people's heads when you hear Shakespeare, like Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet does. It's quite risque, so it's not studied in high school, generally speaking. And I wasn't an English major like many of my librarian colleagues were, so my Shakespeare knowledge is like very small. However, here at Bedford, in a normal year, we have a program called An Evening with Shakespeare, which we've been doing for well over 20 years. I tried to come up with the original date that we started doing this, and I don't know how long ago it was, where it's a dramatic reading of some works of Shakespeare's. And so it was put together by a group of people who used to, but one of the teachers from Bedford's drama program had passed away, and everybody that had worked with her or had been one of her students wanted to do something in her memory. And so dramatic reading of Shakespeare at the library is what they came up with to honor her. She actually went to school with our library director too, by the way. So that's part of why we do this every year. Some of the people who come back year after year are fairly well known. They're kind of off-Broadway type people. And the year that they did Merry Wives of Windsor, I found myself laughing out loud. And I thought that was pretty impressive that I not only sat in there and watched the whole Shakespeare thing, but laughed to it too, because he doesn't usually strike me as a funny kind of thing. So anyway, I find it very interesting and entertaining. We usually do it right about this time of year, actually, because April 20-something is thought to be William Shakespeare's birthday, 25th maybe. So anyway, that's usually what we do.
Birthday and death day.
Birthday and death day, yes. So that's why they do that usually at that time. And they tend to do more of the comedies than they do the tragedies, just because the comedies are mostly shorter, and they kind of pick them apart to make it last only about an hour long, and so it's a little easier to do with the comedies than it is the tragedies. They don't want to do that to the Shakespeare tragedies, I should say. Like Hamlet should only be done in its entirety, for instance. So they're very dedicated to the bard. We put up pictures of the bard, and we have, candelabras on the piano, and, it's a thing. And we serve tea and scones. So just, it's just what we do when we can. So, and then real quick, I just had one other one, because one of the other things that I thought of was a book I had read called Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. It's actually a YA. I thought it was a J, but it's actually a YA. It's a Newbery winner from quite some time ago. And I think I originally read this when we were doing the Dust Bowl as a topic for my nonfiction book club that I have here. It is written kind of in a diary style, and it's during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the Panhandle of Oklahoma. Billy Joe, the main character, is a 14-year-old girl, and her mom and dad are trying to make things work. And her father always wanted a boy, and that's why he named her Billy Joe. And she tries really hard to fill that void. And finally, when she's 14, her mom gets pregnant again, and she's hoping that it'll be the son that her dad always wanted. And then a different type of tragedy hits. And just the writing style in this book, because it tends to be like one story is on one page, and it is written in, I have a example here. So if you can see, it's written in very short, more poetry style, but it's not necessarily typical style poetry, but it makes it a little easier to read about all the painful details of Billy Joe's everyday life, because it's in such short bits. It's pretty deep. I'm glad to see it's a YA, I guess, because it's pretty deep for a J for sure. So interesting story, interesting telling, and that's it.
I remember the first time I read that too. It is excellent, and no matter your age, unless you're really young, it's fabulous. It's for adults as well. It gets you right to the emotions of the Dust Bowl.
I remember seeing that on the shelf in elementary school and picking it off of the shelf. And then I remember going home and talking to my mom about what the Dust Bowl was. So I completely forgot. There's so many books that I probably could have picked for this that I just didn't even. That was a good choice.
All right. And let's go ahead and have Jen share her titles next with us.
Okay, well, my titles are gonna give you an insight. You know, like Jody joked that the Doors shared something about her. Mine are gonna tell you a lot about teenage Jen, in that both of mine are very angsty, and they're things that I, got really into in my coming of age time period. So the first, I've already mentioned him, Edgar Allan Poe. And I think Edgar Allan Poe is perfect for this topic because he wrote both short stories and poetry, both of which are fantastic. I already mentioned The Raven, one of my favorite poems anyway. It's one of those things that is the perfect dramatic poetry reading poem. I can remember in high school, my high school advanced placement English teacher used to do this huge dramatic reading of it, and it was amazing, and I loved it so much. I also love his short stories. One of my favorites is The Cask of Amontillado. I think that's how you say it. I never say the second word right. But he was so good because he created kind of gave us this new genre almost. A couple of his things, The Purloined Letter and Scarlet Pimpernel, are both early detective stories before there were detective stories. The Cask of Amontillado, what I love about that one is it's a revenge story, but it's also a little bit darkly funny. If you're not familiar with it, the main character has this rival, and from the very beginning he's like, I hate this guy, but I'm nice to him and I smile at him, and he doesn't know that when I'm smiling, I'm thinking about how I'm going to take him down. And he takes him to a cellar under the premise of looking at this rare, vintage of wine or alcohol or whatever Amontillado is. I don't know. And he's there's a point where the antagonist is coughing. And he's like, oh, don't worry about my cough. I'm not going to die from that. And the narrator's like, ha ha ha, you're right, you're not. It's awful. But it's also a little bit funny because he bricks him in and leaves the guy in the wine cellar. I just love Poe. It's dark, but some of it's funny, and it's a little bit angsty, a little bit emo, for that time, for any time period. But I love Poe. No problem admitting it. It's kind of early horror, some of his stuff. He just spans all the genres. He's got pirate stories. I feel like Poe wrote a little bit of anything, and you can find something you like in his catalog. My other selection was Emily Dickinson, and I just fell absolutely in love with her when I was 13, 14, and I think her poems are perfect for that. They tend to be very short. They're fairly concise. They're not complicated to understand. I love Shakespeare, but Shakespeare's not super accessible for most, for most modern people. It's what the heck is this about? Emily Dickinson's are easy to understand, and she's got a lot of kind of angsty stuff too. A lot of poetry about death, death and dying. But still, really, really good. I wanted to share one of my favorites. Did I close it? No. And this one I think is probably one of her most well-known, and it's probably one of the not quite as depressing as some of her stuff. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. That's beautiful. So Emily Dickinson, she's just lovely.
I never went through an Emily Dickinson phase, but I did go through a Poe phase. I remember going to the used bookstore and I got the complete, and it went around with me everywhere. And I still think Poe was my introduction to loving horror stories and just being flabbergasted at what happens. Also, Poe really had a thing for putting people in walls and under floors. There's a lot of bodies that end up getting bricked in and I don't know. I don't know why that is, but I guess that seemed like a good hiding place. Doesn't seem like a great idea, but so yeah, I definitely went. And I also love his poem, The Bells, with all of the words, what onomatopoeia. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but the words sound like what they're doing. Loved that poem as well. I remember that one in high school. So thank you, Jen. And finally, let's have Kristen share her titles for this week.
Okay, so the first one that I'll talk about is Jason Reynolds, For Everyone. And I was lucky enough to snag this off a Bedford shelf, but this is just based on the one poem that he has, and I actually was introduced to this poem through a video that he did for, I have to bring my notes up. It's for 826 Digital, which is a national network that provides free resources and platforms for students and teachers. So if you're not familiar with Jason Reynolds, he, number one, is an amazing human being, and number two, he's a really great advocate for youth. And so I really appreciate him as a person. And so I had a really hard time finding some poetry at first, because it's almost like, in my experience, there are so many poems and so many authors that I appreciate, but none that I had really dived down deep in with. But I have probably watched the video of him performing this poem maybe once a week since I found it. And it's still, I read it, especially on days when I'm feeling kind of down in the dumps, or I'm not really sure where I want to go next on my journey, and it just lifts me up. So this poem, For Everyone, it really starts off as just this letter, and when he talks about it in the beginning, he's not even really sure what it is. It's something that he's been working on for years, and he just kind of adds a little bit too, but it changes as he changes. And so at the beginning part, that's like the preface for it, he says, quote, "So I started writing this, a letter to myself to keep from quitting. It was written while I was afraid, unsure, doubtful, and at first I wasn't sure what it was. A poem in form only, a letter written in parts, an offering that I've now been working on for years. For me, a mighty, mighty thing." And so through the whole poem, he just talks about what it means to be a dreamer, and how dreams are for everyone, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from, or if you give up on that dream, or if you put that dream aside for a little bit, you can pick it back up and you can feed it. And he talks about, there's a part where he keeps reiterating, but this letter is not about making it. He says, because I don't know anything about that. But I know how it feels to want that. And so he just does this really incredible way of describing. And in the book, it's really great because there's some little font that's different in it, which I appreciate. And if anybody checks out the video, it's really great because while he's performing it, there's different lights that are present, and the text is on the screen, and it creates all these really interesting just movement while he's talking, and his voice is just so magical. So this is a book that I think like Bella's book, I'm probably going to buy a copy of this, even though I like watching the video, but it's just a really great one to pull out and to just give you some hope and ignite that kind of fire that you may be happening, or you may have it, and just a note to keep going, to keep doing what you're doing. And I think you guys all love Jason Reynolds too, so it just makes me so happy. Shout out to you, Jason, if you ever see this. My second piece was an interesting one, and I was super excited to get into this one. It was really fascinating, especially to read the beginning of it and dive into the poetry. So it's Johnny Cash's Forever Words, The Unknown Poems. And I actually read the audiobook for this, which was really interesting. It would have been really nice if he could have read the poetry, but it's somebody else that reads it. And I think they specifically chose somebody whose voice was similar. It has the same kind of deep, like rusty tone that Johnny Cash's does. In the beginning, it's really interesting because his son does a foreword, and he talks a lot about this was a really tough decision to go through all this poetry and these words and publish them because he didn't know if that's what his father would have wanted him to do. So this was obviously published after Johnny Cash had already passed away. And so he was like, I kind of grappled with, were these works just meant to be in a place that he only knew, or should we share these with the public? Is this going to change the way that they feel about Johnny Cash? But I found it just made me love him even more. What's always drawn me to Johnny Cash is his storytelling, right? Like he has this ability to sing in a way that is so enveloping. Like you listen to a Johnny Cash song and I feel like I'm right there. He's on stage, I'm listening to him, and you just kind of get sucked into it. And you really get that in these poems, and such a vast array of poetry. It talks about love, it talks about his battle with drug use and alcoholism, talks about family, talks about being in the service, your country, a whole bunch of different aspects. So I really appreciated this because I felt like it just opened up a new kind of door into what Johnny Cash was. And also it was interesting because his son talked a lot on the persona that Johnny Cash was in public versus the persona that he was as a family man and a purpose. And part of the allure of Johnny Cash is that he's always been so mysterious, right? Like he's always so dark, especially with the tone of voice and the way that he carried himself. And you don't really get that in these poems. You see this really heartfelt, open, emotional writing that you don't really get with his music and the style the music that he played, right? With those like big, like that big rhythm, you know, like that bum, 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 where it just kind of drives you in. So it was nice to see his writing and even listen to it and just have that kind of be slowed down and have that part taken away. So
nice. Thank you for sharing that, Kristen. And I will share mine. And I have to say, when I knew this topic was coming up, I was really worried because I feel like I am not a poetry person. I feel like I always stressed out in the poetry units in school because I felt like I was never going to figure out what the real, quote unquote, real meaning of the poem was. And that took away the joy of poetry for me. But when I started thinking about this, I did come up with two, and they're both very recent releases. The first is called A Rhythm of Prayer, a collection of meditations for renewal, and it is edited by Sarah Bessey. And I've read a couple other books by Sarah Bessey, and the first thing that I want to say is this is not a book just for people who would say, oh, I'm not going to be able to, I actually bought this one, who would say that they are a person of faith or a person of strong faith or that they subscribe to a certain set of beliefs. I think this book could be read and appreciated by anyone with an interest in what it means to be human, what it means to grieve, what it means to look at our world and the injustice in it and want to feel that there's something better out there. Anyone who looks and hopes that there's something more than what we see day to day. So in her introduction, this is how she describes what she wanted to do with the book. And she says, when I first began to envision this book about prayer, I knew right away what I didn't want to give you. A nice and tidy set of prayers to co-opt for your own. Nope. What I wanted was equal parts example and invitation. And one of the things she really turns to is that access to God is for everyone. It isn't just for people who do certain things or believe certain ways or look a certain way. Access to God is for everyone. So it's parts example and invitation, part permission and challenge to acknowledge the heaviness of our grief and at the same time broaden our hope. Please know that prayer is for you. You get to cry out to God. You get to yell, weep, praise, and sit in silence. And the book contains essays and quotations and poetry. And this is not a book to kind of, like most poetry, you don't want to speed through it. You read one and you sit with it. All of the works in here, whether essays, poems, are by women, and it is a diverse group of women, all ages, all backgrounds, all with their own things that they wish to bring to God and their own struggles and even believing if there's a God. I will say, if you pick this up, there is some language in it, which I know some people are like, what, a prayer book? But this is a very real book about getting real. So one of the quotes that's in here, am I going to be able to find it now? I bet you I lost it. Oh, no, I got it. One of the quotes is by Maya Angelou. And I just love this. I don't think I had ever heard this before. Let gratitude be the pillow upon which you kneel to say your nightly prayer. And let faith be the bridge you build to overcome evil and welcome good. And I just thought, yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, I got to sit with that. I got to think about it. And I could read a bunch of pieces from this, so I should probably stop. But if you have any interest, or even if you're any interest, you're struggling with faith, maybe you don't even know if you believe in God, I think this is a fabulous book. It's open to anybody who's curious or anybody who is deeply faithful. I think there's something in there for everyone. So it's beautiful. Currently in the library system, we have it only available as an ebook, but if you'll want a hardcover, we can get it for you through the statewide interlibrary loan system. So just call your librarian and ask. The other title, I need to preface by saying, yes, we do indeed have the book in the library system. The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman was the inaugural poem that was read for President Biden's inauguration. But I will say that me reading it or you reading it is not going to be the same experience as when Amanda Gorman speaks it. If you want to experience this poem, please go out and go to YouTube, type in Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb, and there are lots of coverage, different videos that show her reading this at the inauguration. She wrote it, and when she speaks it, it is powerful. So I will say I strongly recommend that you view it, and then having it in your hands gives you time to think about it and to ponder it. I'm going to read a couple of lines. Again, go and listen to her. But one of the lines in it, and again, this poem is about our country climbing this hill to be a better country, a better place of democracy, a better place for everybody in our country, with more justice and more fairness and more of everything that we could do better. But one of the lines is, if we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. And I just love that it's not about the divisiveness, if not about the fighting. It's not going to be solved that way. It's got to be about the bridges. And that's so hard. It just is. And she talks about a lot more. And overall, the poem is very hopeful. And you've probably already heard the final line of the poem. It's been talked about a lot, but the final line in the poem is, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I just think, what? Like, what? I can be a light. I can do better. I'm part of this solution. It's amazing. It's powerful. And that's why poetry exists, because it can move you in ways that you didn't think you could, and it can do it in minutes. So those are my two titles that I encourage you to check out. Thank you to everybody who shared this week. Thank you to Jen, who lost internet access, but thankfully we were able to get through hers before she was gone. She messaged us and said she's good. So I was glad that that was able to happen. Thank you to those who listened. We are currently on an every other week recording schedule right now. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks. and we will be sharing books that make us believe in magic the next time we're here. Thank you and bye.